How's
Hopefully
it
everyone can
going?
hear me. So I'm here with the one and only Miss Layla Gray, otherwise known as Propaganda Fluent. How are you, Layla?
I'm doing really well. How are you? How's the new year treating you?
Good, good, good. Doesn't really feel very different, but it is what it is. What about you?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm ready. Ready for 2023 and all of the messiness that they've got in store for us.
What is your prediction of how 2023 will go?
I think that they're going to do a lot of preparation for whatever chaos inevitably they're going to try to, you know, put together for 2024. I've heard that we're supposed to have a civil war. Obviously, we're not going to be able to have food. Energy will be a problem. So we'll see how far they can push these agendas. But again, so many people are becoming aware of the propaganda, aware of all of this like blatant BS that they're spouting and saying, no, we're not going to go along with this. And that's why I think we're able to have this level of freedom that we still get to enjoy because of all of us standing up.
So, are we as Americans ripe for globalism, or do you think that there's still enough kind of vigor amongst the American populace to fight back against a global push?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, a lot of people, I know that we just recently had Zelensky come in and do his little show in front of Congress. And, a lot of people were upset about it and they were like, this is outrageous, but they didn't exactly pinpoint. I didn't see a lot of people pinpointing exactly why it's outrageous. But the prime thing that's like really disturbing about it is it's preparation for the globalism. It's
Hmm.
preparing us to accept these global leaders coming into our state houses and our places and dictating and putting terms out and things like that. So it's preparation. It's early still, but again, with how much media they can manipulate and how much control they can put on people, it's difficult to really anticipate how quickly they could ramp it up.
Yeah.
Maybe 2027 would be something where we would see it, start to being like fully, like really implemented. But right now, it still seems too early. But they are getting ready. So all of these little acts, add up.
Is it appropriate to gauge the degree of American patriots by or based off of online activity, or is that a facade? Does that question make
Online?
sense? So you see a lot of people. For example, you mentioned Zelensky coming to the United
Mhm.
States and speaking to the House, to Congress. Um,
Yeah.
you saw a lot of pushback on social media as a result of that happening. Does that
Hmm.
exactly translate to the number of people who will stand up, say if there was a civil war that were to erupt within the continental United States?
Well, I think we're still pretty far from a civil war. Generally, people don't want to deal with this. They still want, to avoid this drama. They want to avoid, I mean, so many people are getting sick of the woke nonsense. I know personally so many people who were on the left before start to, really take a step back and realize, hey, I do like having a home. I do like capitalism in a lot of ways and what I can afford and what freedom it gives me. So a lot of people are being exposed directly to what it looks like and they don't like it. And so I think that the perception is still there. And as far as we maintain that perception online, that hey, America's not down for this communism. And if you notice, they've stopped, shouting it so vigorously, the whole communist rhetoric. You know, they're tampering it down. And so as long as we maintain that perception, as long as we keep pushing back, yeah, the majority of people are still going to be, very passive. But I think that having that perception and having that outcry is what's going to keep them at bay.
Hmm. Have you seen the movie Lincoln? That was starring
No, I
Daniel Day.
didn't.
Not was it Daniel Day Lewis? I think it was Daniel Day Lewis.
I
So
love Daniel Day-Lewis, but I haven't seen that one. I need to
okay,
see it.
so the movie was based off of a book called Team of Rivals that kind of chronicled Lincoln's administration and how he, as a kind of no name senator, came to win the Republican nomination and go on to win the presidency, and how it was unlikely that this, this individual who no one knew was able to win the presidency, and how he was able to build his administration with a lot of these people who he had beaten in the primary, including Democrats. And what I like about the researcher who wrote the book is she was able to really lean on a lot of the letters that were written back and forth from a lot of the fighters in the Civil War back home to their loved ones. And when you read those letters, you really get a sense of patriotism. And not only that, I mean, in a time where you had the one room schoolhouse, and a time when, adults probably had 2 or 3 years of formal education. I know Abraham Lincoln himself had 2 years of formal education before he became an attorney. But you see the way in which they wrote these letters was indicative of the kind of seriousness with which they were educated, right? Like I personally get the sense that they were trained to be critical thinkers. We weren't too far removed from us having won our independence almost a century or a little over a century earlier. And so that need to preserve the republic was still fresh on a lot of people's minds. Whereas today we're so far removed from that, and you have the added measure of what seems to be an education system that is hell bent on dumbing down the American population.
Yeah.
All that to say, I don't know that the general IQ is such to where people understand why it's necessary to preserve the republic, for one, and then two, what propaganda looks like when it shows up on their doorstep, on the other hand, and then three, do we as an American population here and now have the kind of confidence and strength and sense of urgency to take up arms against a tyrannical government that seeks to usurp our freedoms on the quest for globalism. So I don't know that we check all three of those boxes today. What say you?
Yeah, I know. And this is something that's part of a larger conversation that I think a lot of conservatives are missing, is that we do have a problem with the dumbing down of America. And it's not just that they didn't learn well and their education is messed up. At the same point, we also realize that a lot of our food is, we're being poisoned. Like the quality of food is missing. And all of these things add up together. And that's where we have that disconnect of actually realizing there's a physical manifestation to this propaganda where people can't understand, not just because they haven't learned or they're not exposed, but they're physically unable to hold these ideas in their head because of the lack of nutrition. Honestly, like that's, I mean, it's really that blunt sometimes. So, as I've been looking at all the propaganda, I do give hope and light to the fact that if we can start working on all of these issues collectively, we could see a major turnaround because
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't take that long to, give someone, I mean, especially with young people, it doesn't take that long to change their worldview. And if we start to look at this more as a holistic issue, that it's, the food, the media, the interpersonal relationships, all of these things, we can see that if we message to all those things, we could see like an actual change. And in terms of people fighting back, I think we have plenty of, we still have plenty of Americans, I think, that would be ready to take up arms if necessary. But luckily, they do have the intelligence and the maturity to understand what that would be and
Mm-hmm.
what that would entail because it would be devastating, like
Yeah.
completely devastating. I mean, America does not go lightly.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I'm encouraged by your presence on social media. Um, your handle is propaganda fluent, and so you've resolved to make it kind of your thing to educate people on what propaganda is and what it looks like. And you've managed to grow your platform, and I hope that it grows all the more. I'm also encouraged by people like Chuck Littleton, people like Blanche Robinson, and others who I don't know about who are really doing their part to kind of rise, help to rise consciousness. Um,
Yeah.
and because the thing is like I think what tends to happen when it comes to conservative pundits is they complain about the left, and it becomes a kind of war of slogans and war of trying to one up the other side, and there's no call to action in terms of like, okay, we know that the left is very absurd. We know that they're pushing an absurd agenda. We know that a lot of the things that they're doing is very asinine. But what are we doing about it? Are we breaking into the culture? Are we doing some of the same things that, for example, the kind of movers and shakers during the progressive era were doing at the turn of the 20th century? Because the thing is like a lot of the liberals and progressive and the Marxist types at the turn of the 20th century who were going to Ivy League universities and they were being taught Marxism. This is well documented. They were
Mhm.
very discontent with what they perceived to be the aristocracy of their day. A lot of these were heirs of very wealthy parents who were industrialists,
Yeah.
who had some kind of hand in the Democrat Party, and they wanted to really kind of push a what they perceived to be a progressive agenda. They were very into like eugenics. They were very into kind of labor rights and just a bunch of other things. They wanted to get rid of this. Well, they wanted to centralize education, just a whole gamut of other things. And so what they resolved to do was to disperse and to get into the institutions, education, government, even the clergy. They were able to get
Yeah.
into all these different institutions and, in a sense, kind of gradually and incrementally shift those institutions into their, like, make them into their own image. And in so doing, from those institutions, shift public opinion. Ayn Rand once said, like, what is, I'm going to butcher this quote, but she said, what's absurd today, the things that are absurd and go unchallenged become the kind of doctrine of the country in the future, for the very reason that they go unchallenged. And so, are we really challenging a lot of what, you know, leftists, Marxists, whatever you want to call them? Are we really challenging them in a substantive way? But more than that, not just merely moving our lips and talking, but actually getting into those same institutions and kind of bringing them back to a place of sanity. I know I said a lot, and so just cover what or address whatever from what I said you want to address.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's a great point. And that's the core issue right now. And that's why I started my platform. I'm just trying what I can. Not really a professional media person in any way, but that's the real issue is that the messaging consistently has been terrible. Even when it came to the climate hoax crisis, the messaging could have been much better to obviously counteract the whole leftist idea that somehow we're going to have this utopia if we just don't have energy and all of these things, which is completely asinine and not practical, or even having some realistic execution. Like there's no actual realistic execution. So the messaging, regardless, on the conservative side has always been lacking. And I
Mm-hmm.
take that into account, perhaps because on the conservative side, they're doing tangible, real things. So they're not like typically creative. Um, so that is a huge disconnect. And then the other core issue that is missing like dramatically right now is that conservatives seems to think that you can take someone who's on the left or leaning far left or whatever, um, and then all of a sudden you can make them into an evangelical. That's not how it works.
Mm-hmm.
That's not how the Marxists did. They took little by little baby steps. And that's what's missing. We don't have these bridges. We only have these sort of, things that are attacking people's core identity. And then somehow, if we attack their core identity, they're going to be won over by our facts and logic. Like,
Yeah.
that's not how it works. And that's just something we have to really implement. And I know that we want to be, pure, and we want to have this perfect, society, and this great society that we can so clearly see on the conservative side. We see it. We understand what it involves: having morality, having family, having an economy, all of these things. But we're just doing a really bad job of translating all of those big ideas into appealing and tangible things that would bring someone over from the left gradually, without,
Yeah.
obviously overwhelming them.
Yeah. So you need to proselytize your values, is what you're saying.
Proselytize them in a way that doesn't that doesn't destroy their core identity.
Mm.
Like, honestly, because if you tell someone, let's say, that the climate crisis is a total hoax, you tell someone that, they're going to say, oh, that's not true. They're going to become, very defensive. They're going to get angry, because this is their identity, in a
Mm.
lot of ways. A lot of this propaganda that they've received is simply absorbed into them. They're not using critical thinking. So when they hear things, it instantly becomes, okay, this is part of me. This is how I think, um, rather than being filtered and deciphered. So yeah, we have to gradually move over, like, give them tangible steps to realize that, this whole big catastrophic propaganda campaign of the climate crisis hoax is not real.
Mm. Well, I mean, so the reason I say proselytize, and probably perhaps I could have used a better word for that, but whenever you look at, for example, the Harlem Renaissance, here you had all these Negro artists who were trying to be famous. You know, they wanted desperately to be famous. They wanted notoriety. They wanted prestige.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a figure. His name was Langston Hughes. He was a poet, and he was a homosexual as well. And he had a kind of love relationship with a man named Carl Van Vechten, who was a kind of he was an art critic, and so he wrote for the New York Times, I believe. And he had a lot of connections with um, producers, directors, publishers, so on and so forth. So he had the wherewithal to connect these Negro artists with the people they needed to know in order to become famous. And so the only catch was that you had to, in a sense, acquiesce to the messaging that Carl Van Vechten and his ilk was wanting to push. And the thing about the messaging is it had this kind of undertoned propaganda that really, pushed this kind of leftism. And so when you listen to a lot of the blues from that era, when you look at a lot of the poems from that era, it was very aesthetically pleasing from the surface, but the undergirding message was that of leftism, and that concluded, or consisted, or persisted rather, well throughout the 20th century, and then it reached a kind of climax in the 60s when you had the emergence of rock and roll. And the young baby boomers in the 1960s were rebelling against the adult generation of their day, and so the messaging in their art was very loud, whereas 40 or 50 years prior it was kind of subtle. And so, to your point, it was gradual and gradual, and it built and built and built to the point where people were adopting this kind of messaging through the entertainment they were consuming. And so when it comes to proselytizing your values, I think that it's important for artists who are evangelical, who are conservative, or what have you, to really begin to put forth art that romanticizes their values, their messaging, in a very
Yeah.
palatable way, if that makes sense. What's your response
No,
to that?
definitely. No, I definitely agree, because you have to focus on the positive aspects. When you demonize it, you're demonizing not only the behavior, but you're also ultimately demonizing that person and just pushing them farther away. author, but it's about essentially 7 steps to mind control.
Yeah.
And he outlines that if you want to tell college students or want to get college students to not drink alcohol so much, you would put up messaging not saying that, oh, college students are drinking, they're, crashing their cars, they're getting into all this trouble, it's very harmful and dangerous. You wouldn't put that up because that's essentially like normalizing it. You would put up the idea that, college students are being more responsible. They're, making sure to follow these behaviors, these certain steps to stay safe and have fun. That's the messaging you would have because essentially that's normalizing it. Because once people think that, oh, this is what society expects of me, or this is what's in, it's a trend, I'm going to go with that.
My guess is Layla Gray, also known as Propaganda Fluent. You can find her at
Mhm.
Propaganda Fluent on IG, as well as Propaganda Fluent here on YouTube. Her handle is in the description of this live. So shifting gears a little bit, the discussion that looks like she dropped off. Okay. Sorry, I'm not sure what happened. Um,
Yeah.
okay, so shifting gears a little bit, we're talking about Trump this evening. Specifically something that he tweeted. I guess it wasn't a tweet because it was on his own platform, social, or Truth Social, whatever you want to call it. But before I get to that, shortly after the midterms, Trump took some shots at Ron DeSantis, uh, and from there was a little bit of what you call Republican infighting. What was your take on that
Mhm.
whole situation?
Um, so for me personally, I'm, I think politics is extremely messy. Like I don't think anyone in politics is a good guy. Like honestly,
Mm-hmm.
it's just really like that's just the nature of it and the fact that people in America are so immoral and corrupt. So, I was disappointed in the behavior. But at the same time, I was more disappointed in the fact that people had this fantasy that somehow Ron DeSantis would be seen as this good, noble person in the media and therefore win us back the election and become the president and do all of these things. And as if the media couldn't just completely destroy his image like within a few months. And that was more disturbing to me.
Mm-hmm.
The infighting, yeah, that's disappointing, but the idea that conservatives still think that propaganda can't switch, the whole narrative within a few weeks is very immature, I would say.
Yeah. Was it wise for Trump to make the comments that he made, though?
Um, I think that I can't say because I can't say that because I know that been very successful in the
Mm-hmm.
past and he's had this same rhetoric since like Rosie O'Donnell, like
Mm-hmm.
he
Yeah.
called her like a pig, and people he doesn't like, he calls them out and gets angry. So it's hard for me to say at that level of strategery, but overall, it would be much better if we were more unified and cohesive. But um, yeah, that would be the ideal.
Yeah, that will definitely be the ideal. But here's my concern, Layla. So my concern is that I can acknowledge that Trump did a lot of good when he was in office. Um, and when it comes to the kind of vitriolic hatred that he received from the media, I think he handled that very well. He handled it much better than any Republican politician would have. Whether that politician was John McCain, the late John McCain, Mitt Romney, two individuals who won the Republican nominations before him, or any of the Republicans in the Senate. What we're used to seeing is this kind of weak backboned kind of acquiescence to the rules as they're laid out by the left. who own the institutions of thought in our country. And the fact of the matter is, these individuals, they proceed as though their values are hold the moral high ground, or that their ideals are common. And so for Trump to get up there and to basically defy them, that was good for a lot of us to see. And I think for a lot of the country who were the so-called silent majority, it gave them permission to not be so timid when it comes to engaging in this cultural war in which we find ourselves. However, the concern is that because we can acknowledge that Trump did a lot of good while he was president, for many, it gives this kind of permission for him to say things that are just blatantly wrong, and not really go, not really get any legitimate criticism for saying or backing or pushing things that even his base finds to be abhorrent. For example, the pushing of the jab, or what Blanche would call the snake bite. And so it's almost as if we're not allowed to question some of the decisions that he is making, some of the stances that he's taking, because at the end of the day, he still did a lot of good while he was president. And so my question then becomes, where is the space to ask questions of a president that we love? You get what I'm saying? Because the thing is, to even ask the question is to be demonized by people, on the so-called right, for, oh, you're an anti-Trumper, or you're a never-Trumper. No, I'm not an anti-Trumper or never-Trumper. Is that we need to question our government? We need to question these people. If we can't question them, that's how tyrants are born. And so, where is that space to scrutinize or criticize even the people that we like? Does that question make sense?
Yeah. No, it definitely does. And I mean, I would have to disagree. I feel like people are very critical of him, and especially the conservatives, people who are pro freedom, anti, mandates, etc. I think there's a lot of people who are critical of him, and it has been. I think earlier on it was more of the fanboy thing, but now being a fanboy, you're constantly being called out. Like if you just go with things. Um, but yeah, I think we have to. That's again part of the maturity of it. And I was really, happy to see when, for example, when he was with Bill O'Reilly, and he was talking about getting, his Boost Mobile, as Blanche says. Um, he was talking about getting, the Boost, and people booed him. They booed
Yeah.
him.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's really reassuring. You don't see that in the Democratic Party at all. I mean, honestly, you only saw it with AOC recently, but I think more and more of us are just looking for what are these politicians going to offer us. And we're slowly, I would say the Republican Party is a lot more mature in that regard of holding our politicians accountable.
Well, I'm not so much talking about the fact, or this idea, or this notion that we don't call him out, like we do.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of evidence of that. I guess I'm speaking more to the fact that, to the extent that you have individuals who do criticize him, but at the same time
Hmm.
love him, those people then have to endure the
Are
kind of
demonized,
slander,
yeah.
from individuals who would always
Yeah.
go back to, well, Trump did a lot of good while in office. Well, yeah, I can acknowledge that. Two things can be true at once. Yes, he did a lot of good in office, but the thing that he's saying
Yeah.
right now with regard to the jab, or with regard to this more recent incident, is just wrong. You know what I mean? And so we should be able to acknowledge that it's wrong. But the thing is, you're going to get that. You're going to get that kind of backlash if you criticize any politician, because there's a lot of
Yeah.
loyalists who um, who do look at their favorite politicians as kind of like a godlike figure who can't be questioned or challenged. And to that extent, I do believe that there is a Trump cult, um, um, that you know, that's unfortunate, but such is the way of politics. What say you?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I definitely agree that, and that speaks to a larger issue of the people being demonized for criticizing him, like Candace Owens, for example. Because people, like in general, don't understand that you can disagree on certain things. That doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean you can't be friends or have a conversation with them. And that I think is has been festered by the left and how it's like an all or nothing Marxist like mentality has been pushed through, education and society. As if we all have to agree on this, we all have to, go lockstep, and if you don't, that means you have to throw everything out. And that's not
Yeah.
true. And hopefully we can mature and realize, like we might disagree on something, but it doesn't mean we have to hate each other. Like that's,
Right.
we
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
to have complex conversations. So yeah, hopefully we'll get there.
So what's unique about Trump is that he does have ego. He is very
Yeah.
arrogant, and that I think worked to his advantage when it came to effortlessly dismantling and handling the hatred that he got from the media. His ego worked to his advantage. However, when you when you are trying to position yourself as a leader and you are constantly saying things like, "Oh, this isn't my fault. This is somebody else's fault," and you're basically pushing off blame on others, and those others happen to be subsects of your base, I think it's particularly concerning for me. And so that brings us to the matter at hand. Again, my guest here is Layla Gray. You can find her at Propaganda Fluent on IG and Propaganda Fluent here on YouTube. Her handle is in the description of this live. And so this is what he tweeted today. Let me see if I can't. Whoops. Why is this so big? Let me try to. Okay, there it goes.
There it goes.
Okay. So he said, "It wasn't my fault," and it's always interesting to me when a so-called leader starts off something by saying it wasn't my fault, right? It wasn't my fault that the Republicans didn't live up to the expectations in the midterms. I was 233 and 20. I guess he's referring to the politicians that he endorsed for the midterms. He says I was 233 and 20. It was the abortion issue, quote unquote, poorly handled by many Republicans, especially those that firmly insisted on no exceptions, even in the case of rape, incest, or life of the mother, that lost large numbers of voters. Also, the people that pushed so hard for decades against abortion got their wish for the U.S. Supreme Court and just plain disappeared, not to be seen again, plus Mitch stupid monies, whatever that's supposed to mean. I know what he's trying to say with that last sentence, and I agree 100% with Mitch McConnell misappropriating funds and such. But this whole first part of the tweet, I'm just going to call it tweet for lack of a better word. It's a truth, which is weird. But you know, so he's saying it was the abortion issue poorly handled by many Republicans, especially those that firmly insisted on no exceptions, even in the case of rape, incest, or life of the mother. Now, what's interesting about that is that there's a lot of Christians who believe that the baby in the womb is a life and must be protected per the Constitution and per the Declaration of Independence, which acknowledges that one of the key tenets of being free in the United States is that you are endowed by your Creator with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That first one being life. And so if we're to be a free, civilized society, we have to protect innocent life. And so the existence of quote unquote abortion rights defies our key tenets of a free, civilized society. A lot of us Christians acknowledge that. And I believe that the reason why Trump won in 2016 was because of Christians who voted for him. Yes, you had people who were tired of politics as usual. Yes, you had people who believed in the wall that Trump promised to build. Yes, you had people who believed in the whole myriad of issues that Trump ran on, but without the Christian vote, I don't think he would have won. I just don't. I know
No.
people disagree with that,
Yeah.
but I firmly believe that. And so with this tweet, he's seemingly positioning himself against a large subsect of his base, and I don't think that's politically the wise thing to do. What's your take on it, Layla?
So yeah, I look at the whole all of these like major social issues that are incredibly immoral and shouldn't exist. I look at it from like the perspective of how slavery was handled, you know. And in your documentary, you talk about that, your movie, that it was something that was complex and we knew that it was wrong, but we had to concede. We had to, sort of like, okay, we'll deal with this later. And this also speaks to the gradual progression of things. Like, we have a group of people who are so radical that they want, late term, full term, after birth, abortions. And trying to combat that messaging, um, it's going to be something you have to be gradual about. You have to be very, very specific about. I know that it's unfair that we can't just be like, no, that's wrong, that's it. It's not fair, but we have that message, but we also need another message that's saying, okay, let's look at this from another perspective. Let's push, giving women more care. Let's glamorize the fact that we can have a society where we take care of the mothers and we take care of babies, and it's not such a bad thing to have a baby. And highlight all those different aspects. So I do think the messaging could have been held better because a lot of people that I've talked to who are, I'm in California, they just see it as, oh, they want to take away all of our reproductive rights and including birth control. And that's how it's translated to them. Obviously, whether or not that's right or wrong, that's how the messaging comes off. And it's really abrasive and it really radicalizes a lot of people who would otherwise, be pretty passive about it because they see it as, the final conclusion of their life. Because obviously they're not going to change their relationship behaviors. That's for
Yeah.
sure.
So the thing for me, that I find concerning is that it seems as if we have all forgotten that we do live in a constitutional republic where the states and the counties have sovereignty, and they, per the 10th Amendment of the Constitution, they have the ability to implement legislation that is fitting for the uniqueness of their particular state or county or what have you. And so, with that being the case, with me living in Texas, um, if the general consensus in Texas is that we don't want abortion to be legal, even in the case of rape
Mm-hmm.
or incest, we should be able to pass such laws without any kind of interference from the federal government. If they want to
Yeah.
do that in Oklahoma, that should be their right. If California wants to, make leave abortion enshrined in their state constitution, they should have the right to do that. Although I think that that is again a an infringing upon the rights of the unborn. But my point is that we have to acknowledge the 10th Amendment of the Constitution and maintain and to insist upon the sovereignty of the states and the counties. And so to demonize as a former president those who represent their constituency for coming out against abortion, I think sends the wrong message for those who are just civically ignorant when it comes to what a constitutional republic is and what that entails. Does that make sense?
No, that definitely does. And it is a very complex thing. And that's why, when I look at these politicians and these people, I understand how difficult it is to really translate these incredibly complex topics to an audience with the attention span of like 6 seconds and the education level of still, basically almost functionally illiterate. That's where we are in America with a lot of people. And so I do have some sort of sympathy for that. And I do think, even like you just mentioned, the idea that it's a beneficial thing that we took it out of the federal, because we gave it back to the states' rights. That wasn't emphasized, really. That could have been emphasized more. That, hey, this isn't going to be the end of your life as a woman and reproductive rights or whatever. I don't know how murder is reproductive rights, but anyway. Um, but yeah, the messaging could have definitely been handled, and they could have highlighted that to sort of diffuse the situation. Give me 1 second. I have to pause the screen for just a second.
No, you're fine.
Okay, there we go. But yeah, it could have definitely. They could have messaged to diffuse the situation without conceding that, oh, it's okay to have post-birth abortion.
Mm-hmm.
Like that.
Yeah.
We have to get
Okay.
creative.
Yeah. And so part of my take on this, and you can tell me if you agree or disagree, is that
Mm-hmm.
Trump appears to be capitulating to the kind of alarmism that's being pushed by the left. By saying that, oh, the reason why Republicans didn't perform as well in the midterms is because of the abortion issue, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
I don't agree with that. A lot of the polls that are coming out saying that, oh, the reason why people voted for Democrats or just stayed home during this midterm election is because of the abortion issue. I don't buy it for a second. I think that a lot of the so-called polls that are coming out are part and parcel of the propaganda that we've been seeing in this country for the past century. And rather than pushing back against the very narrative, Trump appears to be capitulating to that narrative, and in so doing, validating that narrative. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that would be a good thing to try to avoid. Definitely. I think speaking to the larger issue of the messaging
Mm-hmm.
and how it was handled poorly, because it was honestly, and I know that I'm really biased on this point because I am part of the Black community. Um, I see other Black women, and it's obviously like the number one issue for them because obviously Black women partake in it at a really high degree, unfortunately. So I am pretty biased on this being a huge issue for them and radicalizing them and spurring them forward. But overall, this has to not be a pointing fingers and blaming. So I understand and totally agree. Leaders don't and shouldn't, look to who to blame. They should be directing and pushing us forward.
100%. So I did have a couple of clips that I wanted to get your response to. Again, folks, my
Mhm.
guest here is Layla Gray, also known as Propaganda Fluent. So let's see here. This first clip I wanted to play was um, from a leftist who insisted that the reason why Republicans didn't do so well was because of this issue. And this is only one example of many. Of course, I didn't want to do a montage. I just wanted to give one example of it, so people can kind of see where I'm coming from. Let's see here.
I found it was really interesting that Vice President Kamala Harris, in an interview with NPR, she said that the midterms are going to be vital, getting a law through Congress to codify abortion rights with Roe overturned. Biden says Roe is on the ballot. But, Democrats had a supermajority once upon a time, and they didn't shore up abortion rights then. How can voters, Democratic voters, kind of believe what Democrats are saying when they're saying, hey, you need to show up and vote in elections, and they really haven't had much to show for it on that front? What's different now?
Well, I would argue that that's not the case when Democrats had a supermajority. We passed the Affordable Care Act. We made health care available to all Americans, improved access, and lowered costs. The fact of the matter is we are in a very different world today than we were just 2 weeks ago. We are in a world today where women woke up one morning and lost the right to govern their own body and health care. There are trigger laws, which you just talked about in a previous segment, throughout the country that are terrifying for women. Laws that were written in 1849 in Wisconsin, that was before doctors even knew how to wash their hands before surgery, and certainly long before women had the right to vote. I think this election has turned on a dime. It's going to be a very different cycle than what we have seen in the past. And in terms of Democrats holding up to their promises about governing and managing the issues that are important to voters, tell you one thing, return a Democratic majority again after this cycle, and you will see action taken to secure the rights of women to have reproductive health choices available to them.
So, Layla, just watching that clip, and of course, this was actually before the midterms. They're kind of setting the tone for why people should show up. And for me, I'm going to try to articulate this in the best way that I can. When you look at the fact that you have these kind of Democrat or liberal pundits who are saying this is what the election is going to be about. I heard the journalist or the anchor mention that Kamala Harris mentioned that this is a referendum on on conservatives who are trying to take away your right to reproductive health. You have, she said something to the extent of, Biden said Roe v. Wade is on the ballot. So they're kind of setting the tone. And that's the kind of pundit or political wing of the Democrats. And then, the Democrat Party or the DNC. And you have these same kind of people who are, again, running journalism in America, who are concocting these polls and this data to then kind of validate what they previously set in motion, if that makes sense. And so, for me, as somebody who is already skeptical, I don't know that the whole thing is just a ruse from the very beginning. And so, rather than just kind of taking their word for it, taking what they're saying wholesale, I don't see enough of the so-called conservative leaders pushing back against their very narrative and saying, like, look, the reason why people aren't showing up to vote are for a number of reasons, not just this abortion issue. You had this man just say, that, Democrats, we did pass the Affordable Care Act. We did do things or implement measures to protect a woman's right to an abortion. And if you give us the majority of the House and Senate, we're going to codify Roe v. Wade. So they're kind of setting the tone. And then after the midterms, because there wasn't a so-called red wave, they can now turn back and say, see, look, we told you that people care about this issue. And here's the polls to prove it. My concern is that, rather than Trump pushing back against that, he's believing the narrative that the left is putting forth. Before I play this next clip, I wanted to give you a chance to respond to that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they never push back. They never control the narrative. They never reframe the arguments to be more beneficial to, the pro-America, pro-freedom agenda. It's always defensiveness. It's always responding. It's always existing within the leftist frame and mindset. So that needs to stop, definitely. And I really agree. I love how you take something that's so, it's so obvious and so many people have become accustomed to this, that, oh, this is why things got messed up, and you really want to decipher it and get down to the bare roots and the foundation of it. So it's good that you're analyzing it from this perspective, because too many people just take it at face value.
Yeah, thank you. So just based off of what you just said previously about how conservatives or Republicans, they kind of acquiesce or they don't really challenge or push back, I wanted to play this second clip that I have in the queue that confirms exactly what you just said. Where is that one? There it is.
Across the country, we are seeing evidence of people changing their tune, scrubbing their websites, hiding the ball, not being truthful about their stance on abortion. The biggest example that got a lot of media attention was Blake Masters in Arizona. And he scrubbed his website of his pro-life position, his position on the bills that he would pass. I think the reason we are seeing this at this very specific moment is because they're scared to lose elections. They want to win, and they are seeing polling. They're seeing special election victories like we saw in New York 19, where abortion was front and center, and voters turned out in droves and elected a champion of abortion rights into that seat. The fact that they're backtracking is one of the clearest signs of how much the Supreme Court's overturning of Roe v. Wade is scrambling the political landscape and energizing voters to turn out at higher than expected rates. Folks are angry, they're scared, they're worried, and they're turning to the voting booth to make sure that that our rights will not be reversed any further and that we can start to move forward. Let me be clear, they are not regretting their stance. They're regretting that they made a public stance and that they are saying these things out loud and voters are responding poorly.
So when she says that, oh, folks are scared, they're alarmed, or this or that, I don't think she's speaking, I don't think she's diagnosing anything. I think she's kind of putting forth what she wants to be the case in terms of, like, she wants people to be alarmed. She wants people to be scared, and she wants people to be moved to show up on this particular issue, so as to put pressure on Republicans or conservatives to backtrack. And unfortunately, a lot of Republicans and conservatives are doing just that. What say you?
Yeah, they could have easily diffused this by saying they're giving people more freedom, more rights to choose, literally, by removing the whole federal control blanket and giving it back to the states at a greater, rate. So it's just unfortunate that it's always this defensiveness, and defensiveness sort of implies that you're wrong. It implies that you're weaker. It implies that there's something missing in your arguments. So that's a real problem. It's so unfortunate because it doesn't matter what reality is. It matters how you're going to frame it. Because for them, they frame it as this moral right and this good thing, which it completely is not. It's an unfortunate thing, but they're able to still frame it as if it's this moral thing. So if we could, at maybe even 10% do that, that would be really great. If we could just frame things to, make it seem beneficial, which it honestly is. It's more beneficial of communities deciding how they want their communities to be.
Yeah. The last clip I wanted to play was actually from some time ago, I think in the 1960s or 70s. And when I saw this clip, it reminded me of, some of the things that I've heard you say just in terms of how propaganda works. This clip is from when William F. Buckley was interviewing Barry Goldwater. And I love his response to this question that was put forth to him, him being William F. Buckley, when it comes to the way in which the media tried to frame Barry Goldwater. So here's what that looks like.
One of the major criticisms of the Goldwater campaign from conservative and liberal Republicans alike was that he ran on an extremist platform and not on a truly conservative platform. Do you consider this criticism valid?
No. I consider it patently invalid. I sometimes think that people who entertain such thoughts are almost exclusively people who understood Senator Goldwater's campaign as it was painted by her bloc. That is to say, they began by misunderstanding Senator Goldwater's campaign, and then, having misunderstood it, confused their misunderstanding with the reality, and for that reason understand Senator Goldwater to have stood in 1964 for a whole tissue of positions, which of course clearly he did not.
Layla, your response.
Yeah, they do a really good job of calling it out directly back then, especially in that clip, because that's really the only stance you can take right now. You have to call things out more directly because people can't take the complexity of an argument and really understand, the different facets of why and how. You need to just say, no, this is what it is. this is why it's beneficial, and really paint that picture. Um, and we don't do that. We're always apologizing.
Yeah. What was interesting about Goldwater's campaign is exactly what the questioner said, which is that, look, Barry Goldwater, he was running a campaign. Leftists, he didn't say this, but this is what he is implying. Leftists were saying that Goldwater is an extremist, and rather than coming to his aid, Republicans in his own party, they joined forces with the journalists and excommunicating Barry Goldwater. To your point, rather than calling out their clear propaganda, they were intimidated by the propaganda and chose to oust Barry Goldwater. And the thing is, like, nothing has changed. The same thing happens today. Whenever we're speaking of Trump, ironically, whenever Trump was running in 2016, I remember vividly people like Mitt Romney and even Ted Cruz coming out and trying to denounce Trump as being, not representative of true conservative values and all these different things. And so it's like, I too was skeptical of Trump, but at the same time, I didn't for a minute buy what a lot of the Republicans were saying about Trump, simply because it was one and the same with what the leftist media was saying about Trump. And so that instantly kind of rose my red flag in terms of, why is it that conservatives, rather than double downing on their own principles and their own values for intimidation and fear, they all the time fold and acquiesce to what the left is saying and doing. Where where can one get that kind of confidence and just backbone to face down such propaganda? Yeah, stand up to it.
Yeah, because propaganda is an invisible enemy. It's an incredibly complex enemy that permeates multiple levels of consciousness and reality. The only way you're going to be able to stand up to propaganda is to be able to identify it and see it. That's why it's so critical for us to actually learn, okay, what goes into propaganda? What is the end goal of propaganda? A lot of people think, oh, propaganda is just to convince somebody or to make them feel a certain emotion. But ultimately, propaganda is just to get someone to take a certain action. It doesn't really matter if they believe in the underlying reasons for taking that action. It just matters if they take the action. Mm-hmm. So if we can mature in that way, which the left has, because they are in these fields, they understand human psychology, they understand social engineering, art, visual communication, they understand how to, put this propaganda out and have it, permeate every single aspect of our society in such, large and subtle ways. And if we want to fight back against it, we have to be able to recognize it and counter it, which is something that, during the Second World War, the counter-propaganda campaign was extremely crucial for the success of, the British and the American forces. We don't have that here. We don't have a counter-propaganda campaign. We blatantly don't. And that's really unfortunate.
Yeah. So how did you kind of learn of a lot of the propaganda that we see in a very inundative way on a daily basis? How were you able to become aware of it and educate yourself on it?
Oh, well, I'm just, personally, I've just been interested in anthropology, psychology, visual communication, all of those different things, esoteric studies, the occult, all of these different things that go into creating how we perceive reality, how we communicate, how we live, how we came to have these ideas as human beings. Because from an anthropological perspective, it's just, a lot of this stuff is very bizarre to me. So I looked at it, I was like, why are people doing this? What is going on? So just having the question of why do people behave in this way? What's, making them do this? That's the first question you have to ask. And then you can look and start to decipher it. And luckily, we have plenty of books on it. We have plenty of things that spell out, okay, you need to do this and this and this, and this is how we should approach difficult topics. But unfortunately, it's not something that's pushed in conservatives. It's not it's not studied or discussed. Like we have, I know many of your viewers probably know about Saul Alinsky,
Mhm.
and you know how crucial he was. He was Obama's mentor in terms of the Marxist movement and implementing a lot of Marxist ideals and strategies. And he wrote a book called Rules for Radicals. And there's a book out called Rules for Anti-Radicals, where a conservative is saying this is how we can counter all of these different things that they're doing. But that's not something that we're having conversation about. Instead, we're busy seceding to the left and letting the left control the conversation all the time, rather than push forward and actually you know study and learn to counter it.
No, you're
So
100% correct. Okay, go ahead.
yeah, it's just the priorities, honestly. It's a soft science. Again, conservatives are looking at the tangible. They're looking at, business and family and all the things that are firmly based in this reality and tangible. And you have to look at the intangible things, the human psychology. We have to get into the creative arts. We have to get into these things that have been taken over completely by the left.
No, you're 100% correct. Um, I like what you said about like with the existence of Rules for Radicals and how there was a book that was written called Rules for Anti-Radicals and how conservatives just ignored it. We're doing a film on G. Edward Griffin. I'm not sure if you know who that is.
Hmm.
But we flew
Yeah.
to California and we flew into Burbank and then we drove down to Thousand Oaks where he lives, and we were able to spend a couple days with him, and my mind was just blown. Just learning about his history and the things that he did in California, how he kind of went into communist circles and saw how they operate, how he went into some of their meetings, how they went into this city council meetings, so on and so forth. The communists did, and they didn't like people didn't know that they were communists. People thought that they were just kind of regular, like average Joe citizens who were
Hmm.
concerned and were coming to kind of push change and push progress in the cities, LA, so on and so forth, and how he was able to counteract some of the things that they were doing at city council. And he talked about like plans that they had and strategies that they had and how they were able to counteract those strategies. What became of G. Edward Griffin? Of course, he's still alive, but if you look up his Wikipedia page, they call him an anti-Semite. They call him a conspiracy theorist. They basically butcher and slander him all up and down the page. And a lot of conservatives either don't know who he is or wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole, lest
Yeah.
they be guilty by association with somebody who is so hated by society. But is he hated by society, or is he hated by the leftist powers that be, who look at him as a legitimate threat to their agenda? And my concern is when it comes to people like G. Edward Griffin, when it comes to books like uh, um, Rules for Anti-Radicals, again, conservatives don't really traffic in that kind of material and those kind of people, because they are allowing leftists to kind of set the tone and set the moral standard for what is right, what is not right, what is acceptable socially, and what is not acceptable socially. And so it's for that reason why you wouldn't find a conservative today who will speak positively of the likes of, say, Joe McCarthy or Barry Goldwater, because the left has already established in our textbooks, in journalism, all over the place, that these people are evil. They were anti-American, so on and so forth. So it's interesting to see the propaganda work in that way.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. It is. And it's unfortunate. And so, this is the other thing. Conservatives need to grow up. You can't just, they honestly, when I talk about certain things, honestly, they get angry about, me telling them, when you go up to somebody and you think that, oh, if you just tell them what they're doing is wrong, that somehow that's going to change their behavior. Like, for example, if someone has a mental illness, if you just tell them, oh, the TV is not, like there's nobody trying to like come and assassinate you, or someone who's a paranoid schizophrenic, you can't just tell them, oh, that's not true. And then they're like, oh, okay, sure. Like, it's the same thing. We have to work within the bounds and whatever limitations, cognitive limitations, our, population has. And so some people are going to be able to understand this certain behavior, or this is why you should act this way, and they're going to be able to take and have critical thinking, and some people won't. So you have to have the different strategies. And unfortunately, conservatives just want to use the same strategies. We get the same results. They slander, they call you a racist, whatever. They've been doing that since G. Edward Griffin, and then they control the narrative. They continue to control the narrative. So it's whether or not we want to actually get into this sort of new realm of, let's say, I guess, counter propaganda.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned earlier that, our, like, most of us have a very short attention span. Most of us are very susceptible to propaganda. We don't really know how to identify it. You mentioned the immaturity of many, Republican voters and pundits who just aren't interested in learning how the way propaganda works. With all that being the case, and I agree, how was Trump able to win the support of so many Republicans in 2016 and 2020, with that being the backdrop?
Well, if you notice, he pushed us ahead dramatically. And this is one of the things that I really admire. He called out the fake news. He made people aware of it. He made it something that they could start to, see. Granted, it was, really polarized. Like, it's only fake if they're talking about, if they're slandering my side, if,
Yeah.
But at the same time, it woke people up because, again, this is something that people cannot see. Like you mentioned with G. Edward Griffin and working with people, they didn't even realize they were communists.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's so insidious about propaganda. The final outcome of whatever actions or stance you're taking is hidden from you. The propagandist and the organization pushing these ideas knows exactly what the end goal is, what the end game is. But for you, you just think you're fighting for reproductive rights. You just think you're fighting to end racism,
That's a good point. Yeah,
and
that's a very
that's
good point.
why it's so difficult for people to ultimately decide for it. And that's what makes propaganda so insidious and so different from other forms of, sales and persuasive communication.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. Well, cool. I think we'll leave it there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a great discussion, and hopefully I can talk to you more about this subject, because this is something that I'm very interested in. Like I said, we are working on the film about G. Edward Griffin and his life and how a lot of this stuff he was on. We released last year the film Uncle Tom 2, which I'm still getting messages from people to this very day about how it was able to kind of wake them up to a lot of the history that they've learned that was just wrong. And it's interesting because it's like, when you look at somebody like a Martin Luther King, for example, and, Martin Luther King Day is coming up in a couple of weeks, January 16th. And so you'll see it. A lot of Republicans or conservatives paying homage to Martin Luther King, not realizing how he was kind of chief in ushering in Marxism into the black church, which then kind of laid the way for activism in the black church that doesn't have anything to do with Christianity or the Bible, and has more to do with Marxism. And for a lot of people, they can't really distinguish Christianity from Marxism because of this. We hope to put out more films like that, and not just political or philosophical or documentaries, but also like dramas and comedies and such and so forth, that really does some of the things that you're talking about with regard to kind of glamorizing in an incremental way our values. My concern is that a lot of the so-called conservative or Christian films that exist presently are so, just cheesily done, to where people aren't interested in them in the first place. and they don't really move the needle in any respect. And so,
You know
anyway,
what we need? You know what we
sorry,
need? We honestly need, you know what we need? We
what's
honestly
that?
need like a CSI or an SVU, like special victims unit type show where they're like doing this murder stuff because women really like the murder stuff
Uh
for some
huh.
reason,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
a lot of people like it. But it's also, oh, let's in our country we love ourselves and our families. By the way, we need to like slip it in
yeah,
a way that it's really, takes people off guard. And so I agree. Yeah, we need something other than a Hallmark channel.
yeah. Yeah, and the thing is like, I mean, a lot of these people are trying, so kudos to them for that. But all of the
Yeah.
good talent, unfortunately, goes to uh, push this propaganda, and that's kind of that's because of Hollywood and how it's established. A lot of
Yeah.
people who I know who have gone to Hollywood and who work, um, on shows like, for example, Curb Your Enthusiasm and others. Um, like, if you get them one on one, they'll tell you like, yeah, I have these values that are Christian or conservative, but I would never
Mhm.
say that out loud lest I lose my job. You know what I mean? So like, there's a lot of
Definitely.
people who they kind of keep themselves in line for fear of not rocking the boat or just being blackballed. You know what I mean? So that's the establishment, and so that's one of the things that people who are sane are having to contend with. And so like, nobody's willing to be the boy in the book or the fable, The Emperor's New Clothes, who's willing to
Yeah.
stand up and call the emperor out for being naked. No, like nobody's willing to do that. And you do have shows that are popular, like The Chosen and some of these things, but it's like, that is very explicitly Christian. You know what I mean? A lot of, like, even our movie Uncle Tom 2, that's very explicitly like political. There's
Yeah.
no there's nobody doing this kind of like subtle entertainment that glamorizes traditional values, um, uh, in a with a quality and with a standard that is Hollywood standard. And it's unfortunate because when you see the fact that wokeism is alive and well in Hollywood, and a lot of these films are doing just very poorly. Like, for example, all the money that's being put into She-Hulk, which is now canceled. Nobody watched it. Like, nobody showed up to watch it. When you look
Yeah.
at, the movie
Cancel
Woman
Catwoman.
King. Right. Yeah, 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 exactly. Woman King and all these other movies, like, they're just
Yeah.
bombing at the box office. And so all this money is being pumped into this garbage, uh, uh, pushing values that people just don't like. It's not so much that people don't buy their values. It's just that it just doesn't make sense in a cinematic, you know, package, if that makes sense. And so
Yeah, no, they
I
don't
feel like
care
there's
that
this
much.
huge gap that nobody's filling. That there's just not enough talent. There's a deficit in talent because all the talent is being wasted, and the putting forth of woke films. When I would venture to say that a significant percentage of the talent that's producing those woke films don't even agree with the message that they're pushing.
Yeah.
So,
No, I totally agree. Well, just one more point before we go. I would like to say that, there's always benefits whenever there's, obviously a perceived negative. Like, for example, the TikTok phenomenon, and
mhm,
everyone loves TikTok. It's introduced um, a method of, entertainment that's hyper realistic. It's messy. It's real. It's just, somebody doing something with a, an iPhone camera. And, we could definitely leverage that. We could exploit it.
mhm,
Back in the early 2000s, there was in Denmark a group of filmmakers, and they produced this whole group of films, like called Dogma 95, where it was just incredibly real and low budget. They didn't even wear makeup in half the films. So, rather than, looking at, okay, we have to recreate a Marvel movie, why isn't that we like create these short form, very hyper realistic films with, the talent of the youth and, whoever's around to spout these principles. So I think we could definitely, there's always a way we can make inroads but
Well,
it's good that we have filmmakers like you as well.
yeah, well, to be fair, I think, just kind of being on this side of it, one of the things that I see is that there is a lot of good talent. One of the issues that they have is just raising money to produce their
Yeah,
films.
definitely.
Yeah, I mean, the YouTube influencer Gothix. I don't know if you're familiar with her.
Yeah, I'm familiar with her.
Yeah, yeah. So there's this filmmaker. His name is Graham Wilson, and he's making a documentary about like Gothic's, like just basically her whole transition to becoming a conservative. And it's a very well done film. It's not released yet, but he struggled raising money for it, and
Yeah.
it's just a shame because it's like, yes, people can use TikTok and people can use their phones, but to make, once again, a film that is of a certain quality to where it will be accepted by the mainstream, that does take money to do. And then on top of that, once that film is made, then what? You're having to, in a sense, kiss the ring of the gatekeepers in order for them to give your product the time of day. And so, like, if you look at, like, there were a lot of good films that were made over the course of 2022 that pushed values that you and I stand by, right? But if you look at the best film of 2022, the best documentary of 2022, it's a lot of this woke nonsense because the Academy is made up of woke people who, again, it becomes this kind of circle jerk where they only put forth and only give play to entertainment or art that solidifies their own values. And so it's like it's not even diverse in terms of messaging. It can only get play, can only get its due if it pushes a certain messaging. And so not only is it incumbent upon us to make the art, it's also incumbent upon us to figure out ways to get that art out to the average consumer so they can even know it exists. So I say that we need more people in this space, but at the same time I acknowledge that because the gatekeepers have the keys and the gatekeepers have a certain ideology or worldview that's hostile to our worldview, it just is difficult to, like, making it is half the battle. Getting it to where people can see it is the other half of the battle, which no one has quite figured out how to do. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I obviously am not in the industry as you are, but I definitely see that we are evolving. We have this totally new genre where things are opening up. So hopefully we can keep pushing it and help incentivize it. Like you said, the money is the real issue, and I totally agree. Distribution, I know, definitely takes up a huge, like a significant part of the actual filmmaking budget, if I'm not wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So we're lacking on that. And that's another issue of the conservative, Republican, whatever, the party of people who are sane and reasonable and want freedom, I
Yeah.
like to say. We're not putting our money where our mouth is. We're not supporting, filmmakers. We're not there for each other, as the Democrats are, as the leftists are. They're totally succinct and they have that. So if we can get that together, we could definitely move it forward because they can't control the distribution as tightly as they could before. And luckily, the film industry is not doing too well. So people
Mm-hmm.
are already looking for alternatives, and it's incredibly motivating to see that people are just getting sick of it, and so they're going to be looking. And the question is whether or not we're going to have the media and the message and the entertainment ready for them when they
I guess,
actually,
yeah, I guess my last point on that would be, because I mean, you make a really good point, because like what I get from what you're saying is that, like, there really isn't any room for like excuses or complaining. Like, we have the technology, we have the wherewithal, the infrastructure to really create resolutions for the roadblocks and the problems that we face. One of which is, Netflix exists, Hulu exists, Amazon Prime Video exists. Like, these things exist, and if they're not giving you play on their platforms, why not create a new a streaming platform where you can open the door to these filmmakers who are, putting forth messaging and just high quality content that does kind of reinforce or glamorize the values that we hold. I think that that's something that needs to be done. I think what tends to happen is the wrong people are creating such platforms, because it's the same thing with social media. In a time where a lot of conservatives were getting shadow banned on IG, Facebook, Twitter, such and so forth, there were, these kind of techie people who set forth to create their own social media platforms. The problem is that when it comes to, platforms like Parler or, Gab or what have you, the marketing of those platforms is very political in nature. And the problem with that is people use these social media for more than just politics. You know what I mean? People use it to communicate with friends and loved ones. People use it to post, pictures of their kids and pets and so on and so forth. And so when you market it specifically as a political thing, you're only going to get a very small subsect of consumers. Whereas if you make it a kind of universal, platform that caters to the needs of everyone, you'll be more likely to succeed. You just have to really stand your ground when it comes to the terms and conditions, or how you censor people who may have a certain political ideology that you differ from, if that makes sense. And so the same thing is true of if you want to make a streaming platform. If you market it as oh yeah, this is for wholesome Christian conservative films, you're not going to do that great of a job getting people to sign up for your platform. Whereas if you made a streaming platform like a Hulu or like a Netflix, where you don't market anything having to do with politics, religion, or anything, but you still allow films that do push a Christian or conservative message to come onto your platform, so long as the quality and the standards of that content reaches a certain threshold, you can, in a sense, kind of create a platform or streaming platform that's competitive to Hulu or to a Netflix. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. No, and that's the gateway. That's the transition. You can't always just be, okay, this is for the political, we're going to fight. And when, we need something in that gateway, that transition, piece. That's something that's not so polarizing in a sense. And like I said, we need the crime stories. We need somebody to get these crime stories that will catch on.
Are you into crime story shows?
No, I just know that because to me, I personally just think it's so bizarre how women especially are so fascinated by, these crimes and true murder stories. I think it's just really weird. How
why do you think that is?
I think that women it's like a fetish, if they fetishize it, it's kind of dangerous. It's something they're missing, in real life. It's just thrilling, and it's just a thrilling thing that for some reason they just tend to lean toward it, being scared and being out of control. So we need that media, and if we can wake up and realize we can get that media in whatever form it is, big or small, we'll see big impact inevitably.
We need a conservative George Soros, is what we need.
Look, I'll take the money for everybody. I'll look at
Well, Layla, it was nice having you. I enjoyed this discussion. Thank you for everything that you're doing, and keep on doing what you do.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it and all of your work.
All right, you guys have a good night.
Good night.